Welcome, my bountiful friends. Prepare to question your very existence and the tangibility of reality, because today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most significant writers in the genre of science fiction, Philip K. Dick. Now, there are already tons of videos, many of them very good quality, about the life of PKD. So it could be said that any additional video is actually superfluous. However, alongside Lovecraft, PKD is my favourite author, so to hell with it. We will be exploring my favourite crazy author and his intriguing antics and worldview. As always, beware of spoilers, for they will be materialising out of the thin air and masquerading as sentient beings. And I will of course be psychically projecting my own extremely subjective musings throughout. So you have been warned. All the best artists have troubled and weird lives, and PKD certainly lives up to this ideal. I could easily produce 2 hours of content just discussing the oddities of his life, but to keep things on track, I will simply summarise and draw out the key points in other segments of this 2-part video. But to start at the beginning, Philip Kindred Dick was born in Chicago on December 16, 1928, to regular working folk, one Joseph Edgar Dick and Dorothy Dick, née Kindred. The weirdness started for him from the get-go. He was born with a twin sister called Jane Charlotte Dick, who unfortunately died 6 weeks later and would continue to be a presence throughout his life as a phantom twin. His parents further reinforced the weirdness by purchasing a dual burial plot, thereby signalling to their surviving young child that his final destination was already planned out and waiting for him. A lot of writers are associated with specific locales, and he is no exception. At the age of 5, his folks moved to San Francisco Bay Area, where a great number of his books and stories are set. His interest in writing began at an early age. He was an avid reader and developed a fascination with science fiction and philosophy. He briefly attended the University of California, Berkeley, where he learned the German language. However, he never graduated, deciding instead to drop out and pursue writing full-time. In the early 1950s, in a fashion similar to Lovecraft, he started submitting short stories to popular science fiction magazines, which were rapidly gaining traction as part of the nascent yet growing pop culture. His breakthrough came in 1955 when he published his first novel, Solar Lottery. The book was well received and it established him as a promising voice in science fiction. But despite his early success, he faced financial difficulties and struggled to make a living as a writer. He continued to write prolifically, producing both science fiction and mainstream novels in an attempt to achieve popular success. But much to his chagrin, his mainstream work was largely rejected by publishers, which led him to focus more on science fiction, with which he experienced a lot more success. His first, and arguably even possibly his largest big success, came in '62 with the publication of The Man in the High Castle, which is an alternative history novel where the Axis powers won World War II. It won the Hugo Award for Best Novel and brought PKD widespread acclaim and the attention of the literary world. This success solidified his reputation as a leading science fiction writer. Throughout the 60s and early 70s, he would go on to write most of his iconic works, the ones that are most familiar with the general public. And these include Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep from '68, Ubik from '69, and Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said from '74. All these novels explored complex themes and showcased his innovative storytelling technique. And indeed, many of the twists or tropes that we are so familiar with today via TV shows or films could be said to have originated from his works. Many of his stories, particularly his short stories, were successfully adapted into films such as Blade Runner, Total Recall and Minority Report. These adaptations introduced his ideas to a broader audience and cemented his legacy as one of the most influential science fiction writers of the 20th century. His route to success was definitely troubled, but his unique style and his ability to push the boundaries ensured his lasting impact on both literature and film. While watching many of the other YouTube videos out there, I noted that a lot of modern female readers picked up on something of negative treatment of his female characters. In regards to this point, it's worth noting another remarkable and often commented on fact about his life, namely how many times he married during the course of his life, an amazing 5 times. His relationships were often as turbulent as his inner world. His first marriage to Jeanette Marlin in 1948 lasted a mere 6 months. Little is known about the reasons for their separation, but there was something of a pattern in all his future relationships. In 1950, he married Cleo Apostolides, a philosophy student. This marriage lasted 9 years, during which he began to establish himself as a writer. Cleo was supportive of his career, but their differing ambitions and lifestyles eventually led to their divorce in 1959. His third marriage was to Anne Williams Rubinstein, a widow with 2 daughters. They married the same year his marriage to Cleo ended, and they had 1 child together, Laura Archer Dick. This period was one of Dick's most productive, but his relationship with Anne was fraught with conflict. She later described their marriage as intense and difficult, and it finally came to an end in 1965. A mere year later, in 1966, he went on to marry Nancy Hackett, a young woman who shared his love for literature. They had 1 daughter, Isa Dick Hackett. However, Dick's growing paranoia and erratic behaviour, which was exacerbated by his drug use, caused their divorce in 1972. His 5th and final marriage was to Leslie Tessa Busby, which was again only a year later in 73. What is it with this guy? Tessa was 18 years younger than Dick, and they went on to have 1 son, Christopher. So there's a bit of a pattern here. This marriage, like the others, was also short-lived and ended in 1977. Despite the brevity of his marriages, Dick's relationships deeply influenced his work, with many of his female characters reflecting aspects of his wives. And again, looping back around to the point that a lot of modern female readers think him a bit of a dick for his appalling betrayal of women. So we can see that he clearly had issues in this department. The other thing that PKD was noted for, and has already just been mentioned, was his relationship with drugs, which was complex and deeply entwined with his creative process. He began using amphetamines, primarily Dexedrine, in the 1950s to power his prolific writing output and meeting publishing schedules. For inspiration as well as a good time, he also regularly dropped acid and smoked weed. This allowed him to produce an extraordinary volume of high-quality original work, but it did all take a significant toll on his mental and physical health too. By the 1970s, Dick's usage had escalated, contributing to bouts of paranoia and erratic behaviour. Lots of his novels feature drugs of varying shapes and effects, and in many ways it's a key element, as the majority of his books question the nature of consciousness and reality and have protagonists who enter into altered states. But his novel A Scanner Darkly is often cited as a semi-autobiographical account of his experiences with drug culture and its devastating effects. The book is both a cautionary tale and a poignant exploration of addiction and identity. The third most significant aspect about PKD, and probably the most intriguing, was his series of mystical experiences, which began in February 1974. Whilst recovering from dental surgery, he claimed to have encountered a divine presence, which he referred to as VALIS, which is an acronym that stands for Vast Active Living Intelligence System. This experience was triggered by a delivery woman wearing a fish pendant, which is a symbol of early Christianity, the ichthus. Dick described seeing a pink beam of light that imparted profound knowledge and visions that struck him. Over the following months, he experienced a series of visions and auditory hallucinations. He believed he was in telepathic communication with a first-century Christian named Thomas, and that he was living in two parallel timelines, one in ancient Rome and one in modern California. He documented his mystical experiences in an 8,000-page journal known as the Exegesis. Perhaps the most stunning element of this aspect is the relating of an extraordinary experience in which Valis seemingly informed him that his son Christopher was ill. He experienced a vision of insight that revealed Christopher had a life-threatening condition, a hernia that required immediate medical attention. Acting on this revelation, he took his son to the doctor, where the diagnosis was confirmed and Christopher underwent successful treatment. This incident became one of the most compelling examples of his mystical experiences, reinforcing his belief in Valis as a transcendent, intelligent force capable of revealing hidden truths. It also deeply influenced his later works, particularly the Valis trilogy, where he explores themes of divine intervention, reality, and the nature of consciousness. In his larger body of works, he often explores various interpretations of his visions, ranging from divine revelation to mental illness. While some dismissed his experiences as the result of drug use or schizophrenia, others saw them as a genuine spiritual awakening. The culmination of his spiritual experiences was perhaps the Metz Conference in 1977, where he informed an assembled room of reporters and international journalists that he had spent a significant amount of time in an alternative timeline in which the Nazis had won World War II. This experience was, of course, the source of inspiration for The Man in the High Castle. His life came to a tragic and premature end on March 2nd, 1982, at the mere age of 53. The circumstances were sudden and deeply sad. On February 17th, he suffered a stroke at his home in Santa Ana, California. He was found unconscious and rushed to hospital, where the doctors determined he had experienced a series of strokes, which had left him in a coma. Despite medical efforts, he never regained consciousness and passed away 11 days later. The timing was particularly poignant as it occurred just months before the release of Blade Runner, the film adaptation of his novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. The movie would go on to become a landmark of science fiction cinema and was the first adaptation that brought his work to a broader audience and cemented his legacy as a visionary writer. And his remains would go on to make that fateful journey to their duly appointed place. He was interred alongside his twin sister Jane in Fort Morgan, Colorado. The shared gravestone symbolises the bond he felt with her throughout his life. His untimely death marked the loss of a literary genius whose explorations of reality, identity and consciousness would steadily continue to resonate with more and more readers and audiences worldwide. PKD's writing was clearly shaped by a wide range of diverse influences, which spanned literature, philosophy, personal experiences, and historical events. Regarding literary influences, he was deeply influenced by classic science fiction writers of various different hues and flavours that were popular during the time he was growing up. But it's been pointed out that he was particularly keen on the Canadian writer A. Van Vogt, whose novels were serialised in the Astounding Stories magazine that would have been available to him as a child. Vogt's fragmented storytelling and surreal narratives inspired his own approach to reality distortion. I was happily surprised to discover that he was also an admirer of H.P. Lovecraft, presumably coming across his stories in the same Astounding Stories comics, which Lovecraft frequently wrote for, again in order to earn a living, much in the same way as Dick himself would. Lovecraft's cosmic horror existed in a universe of conspiracies, parallel dimensions, and hidden truths, all of which undoubtedly resonated with PKD, along with themes of existential crisis. And so it turns out that my two favourite authors are in fact actually linked. Beyond science fiction, he also drew from the Czech author Franz Kafka, whose trademark tales often involved protagonists who struggled with their own identity and place in the world. And much of his tales were dark and dealt in paranoia, social alienation, and oppressive regimes. So there's quite clearly a heavy connection there with PKD's own work as well. The next big influence was that concerning his religious experiences regarding Valis. One would expect that such an encounter might link itself to Catholicism or evangelical veins of Christianity, but intriguingly he was drawn to Gnosticism, which is a proto-Christian and Islamic mysticism that taught heavily that this world is in fact one of subjective illusion, which is influenced by a veritable dark net of authority, media, and false religion, and that the true source of the divine lays beyond this realm, which is in fact ruled by a false god. And we can find this leitmotif throughout a great number of PKD's novels. And of course, like thousands of other contemporary citizens and writers of that time, he was also deeply affected by World War II, which loomed large in the memory of the generation before, and the facts of which, including the many horrors, trickled out into the public domain during his formative years. And this was followed by the Cold War, which was a prominent feature in any aware person's mind of that time. It was an existential threat that loomed heavy on the horizon and promised nuclear Armageddon at a moment's notice. He lived through the Berlin airlift, the Prague Spring, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the JFK, RFK, and MLK assassinations, which, let's be honest, with the power of hindsight, were probably all orchestrated by shadowy elements of the US government and the CIA. And so, in this fine melange of dark influences, both fictional and non-fictional, the literary wine of PKD was fermented and then served to us. PKD's output was truly prolific. He produced 44 novels and 121 short stories. His writing career can be divided into 3 distinct periods, each marked by their own unique themes, styles, composition, and focus. So let's take a look at them. So first up is the early period, running from the 1950s to the early 1960s. This phase was characterised by PKD's adherence to traditional science fiction themes, dressings and action. He published numerous of his short stories via pulp sci-fi magazines during this time. Significant novels from this period that typify it include Solar Lottery and Time Out of Joint from 1959. These works often feature dystopian settings governed by sinister military-industrial authorities. But it's notable that even these early works often question the nature of reality. His second period is known as the Middle Period, which is from the mid-60s to the 1970s. During this time, his writing became more experimental and philosophical, and he produced most of his most acclaimed works, the ones that are most familiar with the general public, such as The Man in the High Castle and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Ubik, and The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. These works often delved into themes of identity, perception, and alternate realities. The late period ran from the mid-70s to his death in 82, and it's the final phase of his career naturally, and was heavily influenced by his mystical experiences and struggles with mental health. This area is really the one for hardcore fans of PKD. It's by far his most interesting, I think. His works from this period include A Scanner Darkly from 1977, and the Valis trilogy, which consists of Valis, the Divine Invasion, and the Transmigration of Timothy Archer. Although there is a fourth one, a hidden one, Radio Free Albemuth, which is a more fictionalised account of the same theme. They all blended science fiction with theology and metaphysics. These novels reflected his quest to understand his visions and the nature of existence, as well as his own identity. And there's quite a sort of dark, threatening theme that runs throughout them that makes it quite exciting. PKD's protagonists are often ordinary individuals caught in extraordinary circumstances. They struggle with paranoia, shifting realities, and existential uncertainty. Unlike the larger-than-life heroes of traditional science fiction, his characters tend to be small businessmen, bureaucrats, or working-class individuals who suddenly find themselves questioning the nature of their existence. They are rarely powerful or heroic figures. They often reflect the mundane realities of life, and they'll experience deep paranoia, suspecting that their world is an illusion or that unseen forces are manipulating them. And they frequently struggle with altered perceptions, whether due to drugs, technology, or external manipulation. They invariably question their identity, their memories, and whether they are truly in control of their lives. And many of them are also trapped in an authoritarian or corporate-controlled society, and therefore fighting against forces that are beyond their understanding or resistance. Typical and classic protagonists include Joe Chip from Ubik, who's a down-on-his-luck technician, Rick Deckard, who's a bounty hunter questioning the nature of humanity as he hunts androids, Bob Arctor from A Scanner Darkly, who's a narcotics agent who loses his identity due to drug-induced psychosis, and Jason Taverner from Flow My Tears, the policeman said. He's a celebrity who suddenly finds himself erased from existence. Yeah, they are deeply human, flawed, and often existentially lost, making them relatable despite the surreal worlds they inhabit. And his antagonists are often not traditional villains either, but rather forces of control, deception, or existential threat. Many of his novels feature bureaucratic systems, corporations, or unseen entities as the true antagonists, rather than a singular evil figure. When there is a direct antagonist, they tend to be manipulative, authoritarian, or reality distorting. Many of them are government officials, corporate executives, or secret policemen. And some of them may have the ability to distort reality, whether that be through psychic abilities, drugs, or technological controls. And there tends to be an element of cold bureaucracy that they level against the protagonist in an emotionless fashion, often enforcing rules without concern for morality. And in some cases, they're even cosmic or unseen forces. So they could be abstract entities, such as the manipulative Jory in Ubik, who's a half-life entity that consumes the consciousness of others and warps reality. Or it could be, again, the example of the secret policeman is Felix Buckman, who's part of the dystopian surveillance state. And then we have the Biltong from the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, who are a mysterious alien force that may be manipulating human perception. And the last character is a neutral character. It's actually the setting, San Francisco. And you, as a reader of PKD's works, will keep encountering San Francisco and the wider Bay Area of Berkeley and Oakland again and again through various different lenses. Whether the reality has shifted, timelines have shifted, or it's a future, or it's the past. Again, San Francisco and its environs are always there, and they're always familiar yet changed when we encounter them. And the city itself will host the antagonists and the protagonists as well. So it's a familiar facet that we will always encounter in his novels. And this is where we're going to leave part 1 of the PKD overview. In the next video, I'll be looking at his significant works, his style and atmosphere, and his themes. So in the meantime, I'd greatly appreciate a like or a subscribe. And until next time, take care and goodbye.